This next speaker that we have, our first keynote speaker, I was having a yarn because I don't like to really use speaker notes very often. I was asking our next keynote speaker how she'd like to be introduced. She said I could make all the jokes I wanted. So I was just having a yarn to Border Patrol outside because we got someone up from down south, from across the Victorian border. And she didn't want all the flash fancy formal titles, so I just said, Sis from down south's going to talk next, but we do have Sue Ann Hunter, Deputy Chair and Commissioner of the Yoorrook Justice Commission, with our opening keynote address. Please welcome Sue Ann.
I did tell her she could make jokes. So before I begin, I too want to acknowledge country. We gather on the lands of the Darug peoples, and acknowledgement isn't just a formality, it's a recognition of living history that we stand upon these lands. To the elders past and present, and to the emerging leaders who refuse to accept the status quo, your strengths guide us. To everyone in this room, particularly our First Peoples who live and breathe these challenges daily, your presence here shows that change is possible. It really is a privilege to be here today, and I want to thank you again for asking me. I want to start today's session by playing a video to help sort of set the scene. So I'm not going to talk for the whole 45 minutes because that'd be really goddamn boring for you all. So I'm going to throw a few videos in. This 4-minute video was made to coincide with the release of the Yoorrook Justice report that we released in September 2023, which followed a 12-month inquiry into Victorian's child protection and criminal justice systems. And the injustices faced by First Peoples speaks louder than any words I could offer.
I formally and unreservedly apologise for police actions
for the failures of my department to prevent these passings where they could have. I am deeply sorry.
I apologise for the ongoing impact and suffering.
The harm and injustice that should have been avoided, could have been avoided.
Yoorrook heard 7 formal apologies from ministers, senior public servants and the Chief Commissioner of Victoria Police for the historic and ongoing harm caused by Victoria's child protection and criminal justice systems against our people. Their words were important, but the real test is the actions they take now.
Self-determination. It's not just a framework. It's not a reform framework. It's what our people have long advocated for.
Giving Aboriginal people genuine control over the issues that affect our lives. Giving us the power, the resources and the authority to design a system that enables our children and families to thrive.
Yoorrook Justice, report into Victoria's child protection and criminal justice systems, makes 46 recommendations for reform, including clarifying and strengthening the Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities Act. These recommendations also include negotiating through treaty new, dedicated legislation developed by First Peoples for the safety, well-being and protection of First Peoples children and young people. Creating a new independent police oversight body to end the practice of police investigating police complaints. Changes to bail laws that go beyond amendments recently introduced to Parliament to stop people being unnecessarily imprisoned. Raising the minimum age of criminal responsibility to 14 years without exceptions. Prohibiting routine strip searching in all Victorian adult and youth prisons.
It's been heartbreaking over the past few months to hear story after story of how our child protection system is failing our Aboriginal children. Victoria is removing children from Aboriginal families at the highest rate in this country.
Our people are dying in custody and our children are being taken away. How many, I wonder, even just in the last few hours this morning?
So I just see a lack of urgency. Will heads roll? Will KPIs be brought in? What will happen to make the department accountable for change?
Human rights and cultural rights are legal entitlements. To see legal entitlements violated was shocking. Until this change happens, injustice will continue.
There has been some progress since Yoorrook started this inquiry. However, small steps are not enough. Self-determination and systemic reform are needed. This report must be a catalyst for transformative change. Now is the time for action.
The report and a full list of recommendations can be found here: www.yoorrookforjustice.org.au.
Now I'm hoping I just leave that slide like that and it doesn't do anything. Okay, great. So that video shows the reality in Victoria today, not 50 years ago, not in some distant past, but today. Today our child protection and justice systems remain inextricably linked for our people, a chain that binds our generations. When the Victorian Government initially supported just 4 of our 46 recommendations, it spoke volumes to us. A year later, that number has crawled to 6, while more than a quarter remain in limbo of under consideration. Let that sink in. Recommendations born from trauma, pain and lived experience sitting on a bureaucratic shelf. So down in Victoria, 190 years ago, next week, marks the 190 years since Edward Henty's arrival in Portland on Gunditjmara country. One boat, one moment, then began the cascade of destruction. Within months, Melbourne emerged. Within years, our people faced a decimation through massacres and imported diseases. But it was the 1886 Half-Caste Act, an innocuous sounding name for a weapon of cultural destruction, that still echoes through our communities today. Alfred Deakin, a name celebrated in Australian history books, orchestrated this act in the dying moments of parliamentary that year. His great-grandson, Peter Sharp, recently testified to our commission about the deliberate, calculated move to tear apart our families. So Peter said the passing of the Act appears to have been a deliberate, well-planned tactic. This legislation had the effect of forcing Aboriginal people of mixed heritage off the reserves and missions to assimilate a society in which they faced racism and discrimination. Many chose to hide their Aboriginality as a result. The Act also gave authorities the breathtaking power to remove Aboriginal children from their families, kick-starting the stolen generation. Eventually, other states followed with what they called the success of the Victorian laws to enact in similar legislation. Estimates varied, but over a period of around a century, as many as a third of all Aboriginal children were removed from their families. Laws were changed and repealed, but the practice of child removal has not stopped. Think about this. Over a century, 1 in 3 Aboriginal children were stolen from their families. Today, our children in Victoria are 22.5 times more likely to be removed than non-Indigenous children. That's 1 in 10 Aboriginal children in Victoria live in out-of-home care. This isn't history, this is now. We know that the child protection system acts as a pipeline into youth justice and then the adult justice system. Yoorrook has heard evidence of child protection workers turning up in birthing suites of hospitals with the intention of removing a baby from their Aboriginal mother. We also heard evidence of Aboriginal young people being criminalised while living in state care for actions that should never have been made their way to police. It is not enough to say the Victorian child protection system has failed, but it continues to fail our children, our families and our communities. The colonial machine is working exactly as it has planned, perpetuating Aboriginal disadvantage in order to maintain the status quo, and the status quo for our people. In a world in which our people face racism, continuing injustice and disadvantage at the far greater rates than non-Aboriginal people, let me be clear, these aren't just statistics. Behind every number is a story. We are 10 times more likely to access homeless services. And we heard through evidence kids as young as 10 accessing homeless services. That is Aboriginal children. We are 33 times more likely to be hospitalised for a family violence incident, and Yoorrook has heard evidence that most often the perpetuator is not an Aboriginal person. We are 15 times more likely to end up in prison, and the gap is widening. And we are more likely to be denied bail and to experience racism and to face bullying. We are underrepresented when it comes to owning a home or finishing high school and university, and overrepresented when it comes to poor health and suicide. This isn't failure, this is the colonial system working exactly as it was designed, perpetuating disadvantage to maintain power. But here's what gives me hope. In Victoria in this century, we have seen the foundations of transformational change slowly being built, particularly around land injustice areas. From 2015, the first 4 successful native title self-determinations in Victoria. In 2006, the Aboriginal Heritage Act became law, allowing the registered Aboriginal groups of traditional owners to nominate particular intangible heritage for recognition. The passing of Traditional Owners Settlement Act in 2010 enabled the state government to recognise traditional owners and make agreements. In 2018, we saw the establishment of the Victorian Treaty Advancement Commission, which you guys have just started here, so setting a path to treaty and truth. And the following year, the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria, a democratically elected body of First Peoples, they represent the body for Victorian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, was created. They in Victoria are our voice, and the world hasn't fallen apart, by the way. And last year, a landmark framework for treaty negotiations framework was signed, and the Victorian Government and the First Peoples Assembly, with oversight from the Treaty Authority, will see the start of treaty negotiations in the coming months. So each victory was hard won, and each step forward we have faced resistance. So this brings me to the Yoorrook Justice Commission, the first formal truth-telling body in Australia, established by letters patent in May 2021. We are a Royal Commission, and we have the powers of a Royal Commission. And I don't know if you saw a bit of our Judge Judy moments up there, but we take it to the state very well. So I do encourage you to look on our website, and all our hearings are on there. To our great disappointment, Queensland's Truth and Healing Inquiry, the second formal truth-telling process in the country, will soon be abolished by the new government, but we continue full steam ahead. Our 4-year term ends in June 2025 when we deliver our final reform report and the official public record to the Victorian Government and the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria. We are still gathering submissions and developing our final recommendations and finding new and interesting ways to share the stories given to Yoorrook and the rest of Victoria. An important part of our mandate is to build a shared understanding of the true history of Victoria. And the reality is that the history is not well known. Most Victorians do not know the full story of our shared history. When we understand the truth of the past, it's how it connects us with the present. Change isn't so scary, fear dissipates, and because we understand why change is needed. I am hopeful that better times are ahead for our people and for all Victorians as we continue on the journey to truth and treaty. A few facts about our commission is that it's First Peoples led, so 4 out of 5 commissioners are First Peoples, 3 are Victorian traditional owners, and as I like to call him, the white guy, the former federal court judge, is there as they have someone around law, but he's come over to our side, which I'm really happy. So him say, walk in and go, hey, you mobbed today? And I'm like, yeah, my brother. And he's like, my sister. So it's working well. Around 40% of our staff are First Peoples, and 2 out of 4 of our council assisting are First Peoples. Yoorrook means truth in a Wamba language and has the powers of a Royal Commission, the powerful form of an inquiry in the state. The reason you say Royal Commission, but it's Aboriginal led, so there are challenges about making sure it's culturally safe as well. If we didn't, so we have the same powers, it's best to say, as Supreme Court judges, so we can compel evidence, and we have hundreds of documents from the state that no one's seen before. But we also make we also have the power to bring ministers to the stand and to answer these questions, which has never been done before. So we held specific inquiries into Victoria's child protection and criminal justice system, land injustice, health, education, housing and economic prosperity. We've held so far 67 days of public hearings spread across 7 hearing blocks with 229 witnesses. Heard evidence from First Peoples with lived experience of systemic injustice, community groups, organisations, government ministers, department officials, the Attorney-General, and we had the Premier Jacinta Allen. We heard from non-Indigenous people, including descendants of early colonial figures, held hundreds of community events, information sessions and roundtables and discussions, and I'm tired, I just want to say. I'm reading this out going, no wonder I'm tired. Finalised more than 700 submissions from individuals and organisations, with hundreds more in train. Made numerous visits to prisons, to hospitals to gather evidence. Received around 10,000 documents from governments in responses to notices to produce, and engaged more than 7,000 First Peoples and received evidence from at least 1,200 peoples across the state. That's a lot. But you've only got that to look forward to, John. That to look forward to. So as commissioners of the historic inquiry, we are aware of the great responsibility that that is bestowed upon us. We realise that helping offer a path forward for all Victorians to understand and to learn the full history of this place now called Victoria. Yoorrook work also feeds into the treaty process underway, and there is no doubt it will be interesting for all New South Wales to watch as the state embarks on your treaty process. Part of Yoorrook's role under its letters patent is to develop the topics for treaty negotiations, and many of Yoorrook's recommendations will also be subject to treaty negotiations. I think the hope we have is our recommendations don't sit on a shelf, they go into the treaty making process. So treaty will help turn recommendations into action and ensure Yoorrook's findings live long on after the Commission ends. If truth-telling is the what and the why, treaty is the how. And these processes benefit from each other and in turn grow stronger. I now want to talk more in depth about the Victorian child protection system and in particular Yoorrook's inquiry into them. So to kick this off, I want to show you another video, and I'm sorry this one is just of me talking again. I didn't realise they put this one in. However, it's important because it sums up a lot of challenges our people face in the system. When Victoria's Minister for Child Protection, Lizzie Blanthorne, gave evidence to Yoorrook, she made a formal apology to First Peoples harmed by the system. So the video I'm about to show you is the response. Your apology today is significant, and you have apologised for the actions of governments and the harm they have caused and continue to cause Aboriginal children, families and communities across generations. An apology without action is not enough. The real test will come in the actions that you and your government take after today. Our children should be able to grow up healthy, happy, strong, connected, knowing their culture and who they are in themselves. But for thousands of our children involved in the child protection system, this is not the case. It's been heartbreaking over the past few months to sit in this room and in rooms across this state and hear story after story of how our child protection system is failing our Aboriginal children. We are here 26 years since the Bringing Them Home report and some 16 years after the Prime Minister's apology to the stolen generation. Seeing shameful child removal statistics that show things have gotten worse, that show that Victoria is removing children from Aboriginal families at the highest rate in this country. Every single statistic, every single number is a child removed from their parents. A child that is too often also removed from their siblings, their culture and their community. Victoria's child protection system is causing devastating long life impacts on our children, our families and our community. It is creating trauma that is passed on to future generations. We sometimes make the mistake of talking about the child protection system as if it's a thing that exists and runs itself. We need to remember that the laws, the policies and the decisions that make up this system are made by people. People charged with this power by the state. People like you who have the power and the responsibility to protect our children, our families and our culture. There are three things that everyone who has come before us in this inquiry has agreed upon. The current system is failing Aboriginal children and families. It must urgently change. This change must involve self-determination for Aboriginal people. And when we talk about self-determination, we don't mean a tokenistic transfer of inadequate resources and limited authority within a failing system. We mean giving Aboriginal people genuine control over the issues that affect our lives, giving us the power, the resources and the authority to design a system that enables our children and families to thrive. Minister, this is the action that must urgently follow this apology. So there's a few key points I want to reinforce here. The laws and the policies that are used to remove our children into entrenched disadvantage are made by people. To do nothing and allow the current system to continue is still a decision made by people. And those harmed by the system, they are people who want to live a decent life, people with families and communities who love them. Truth-telling is about trying to tell the human story of colonisation, because when we see issues as affecting individual people rather than policies and numbers, it is much harder to turn a blind eye. It is much harder to allow children to be taken from homes, and it's much harder to take a child from a mother's arms. Yoorrook's inquiry into Victorian child protection system was exhaustive, with evidence gathering ranging from formal, live-streamed hearings to closed hearings, private briefings and submissions. Many of those who gave evidence were stolen generation survivors or the family members of survivors who carried their own challenges and traumas. Some wanted to shout their stories from the rooftops, while others wanted to speak directly to commissioners and keep their evidence confidential. Everyone had a different story and a different way of coping with their trauma. I want to tell you the story of Michaela, who gave evidence to Yoorrook initially in a closed hearing. Michaela, please note, Michaela isn't her real name. Michaela was one of those people who wanted to shout from the rooftops. She wanted others to learn from her situation and from her story to be read by politicians and the public alike. Michaela had written a submission to Yoorrook, and eventually this submission was turned into an opinion piece by The Age. And I want to read you some of this article. I never met my dad. The first time I ever saw him was the viewing room at the funeral. I didn't know I had a full sister until that day. I met her and the rest of the side of my family the day of the funeral. I was 17 years old and most of them didn't know who I was. When I was 18 months old, I was removed from my mother's care. She was a heroin user when she had me, and when I was born, I was put in a humidity crib while I suffered the withdrawals from the heroin in my system. I was the third child. My two other siblings were removed aged 6 and 7. You'd think by the time I come along, the Child Protection Services would have been aware of my mother's issues and removed me sooner. Department initially placed me with my nan, who was non-Indigenous, and she kept me completely away from my dad and Aboriginal side of my family. I didn't know my Aboriginality until much later in life. I used to see families in shopping centres with a mum and dad, and children wonder, why couldn't I have that? Shortly after my eldest child's birth, when I was aged 25, Child Protection was looking to take him from me because of a violent relationship I was in at the time. Baby and I stayed in the hospital for 10 days. After that, we were put into kinship placement where I could stay with my child, but this didn't work out. We then moved into a different kinship placement arrangement, but it left me feeling isolated. The people we were leaving with were constantly tearing me down as a mother, and there were no boundaries. At one point, I felt like everyone was having an opportunity to bond with my baby, except me. My child went through 3 different placements in 3 months, which meant we were constantly in and out of court. I became pregnant with my youngest child while I was still fighting to get my eldest child back. While I was pregnant, I was incarcerated for 4 days. The department treated me like a criminal after my 4 days in the prison when I was almost 7 months pregnant. 3 months after I got out, the department informed me that I would not be reunified with my eldest child. Our experiences with child protection have traumatised us. There are days when my baby just wants to cry and when my 3-year-old wonders where he might be going next and who is going to come and take him away. Through the entire process, the department never asked what it could do to help or what support we needed. It never told me what it needed from me so my child wouldn't be removed or so I could get my child back. If the department had been willing to work with me, to tell me what I needed to do, to have him stay with me, I would have done anything. Our communications team worked with Michaela to tell her story with the age while protecting her anonymity. There were all her words, but an Aboriginal journalist helped arrange them in a way that worked for the audience. Michaela was supported by a social and emotional wellbeing team and also received legal advice. When the team spoke to her in the months after the story, she was doing well and feeling empowered by being able to share her story. Sharing was part of the healing. Across Yoorrook's inquiry, we heard similar stories of removal and a system which is not designed by or for our people. We heard about once children are in the system, it's hard to get them out. We heard, commissioners heard evidence about Aboriginal families being judged by the child protection staff through a white lens. We were told about the government being too slow to support families who need help and too fast to remove children and place them with non-Aboriginal carers, away from their family, community, culture and country. We heard evidence of children being put on a path to from the child protection system and then the justice system from the very time they were born. We also heard about traumatic lifelong impacts about child removal and the intergenerational trauma that often follows. But through the truth-telling process across Victoria, the Victorian government acknowledged their part through injustices, and the former Premier Dan Andrews promised to overhaul the system, but he hasn't. Just saying. And an important part of the journey was being able to question government ministers and representatives. In all, Yoorrook heard 16 formal apologies from representatives of government during these hearings, including the Child Protection Minister, Lizzie Banthorne. These words are on the public record. In particular, Minister Blanthorne said, "At the onset, I acknowledge the grave injustice inflicted by the state and many state-funded organisations on First People since colonisation. The Yoorrook Justice Commission provides an opportunity for us to formally reckon with both past and ongoing injustices." And then she went on, and it was well documented that the predominant aim of the forcible removal of First Peoples children was clear and explicit intention to eliminate Your First apology Peoples today by is significant. ensuring that their unique culture and identities would disappear. These legacy of trauma created by colonisation, subsequent laws, systems and practices and beliefs but continue to pervade our contemporary child protection system. She said, "As the Minister for Child Protection and Families, I acknowledge the profound impact of colonisation and associated assimilation policies. I acknowledge the shameful history of the removal of First Peoples children who were taken under the guise of protection. And I note that from the time of colonisation there were many agencies involved in the removal and assimilation of children. As a minister and as a mother, I find it truly heartbreaking. I take this opportunity as Minister to apologise formally and unreservedly for the harm caused by the historic removal of First Peoples children from their families, their communities and their country. For the harm caused by historic practices that infringed on the rights of families and children to live free from violence, abuse, racism, deprivation and discrimination. And for the harm caused by historic practice that has infringed on the rights of families and children to practice their culture safely and happily. On behalf of the State of Victoria, I say sorry." Now, these words are important because they acknowledge fault and they are all there for everyone to see on the public record. And while we are deeply disappointed by the level of progress taking place in Victoria, we're moving in the right direction, even if they're taking baby steps. Now, before I conclude today, I want to share one final story, one that shows the transformative power of truth-telling. In 1843, on a property in Gippsland, a massacre occurred, a Warrigal Creek, and today that land is owned by a lady named Elizabeth Boulderstone, and her story represents something profound about the journey we're all on. Elizabeth isn't just acknowledging the past, she's actively working hard to heal it, hoping to return the massacre site to its traditional owners, but I'm going to let you tell her, so we'll play another video.
The relationship that you've built with traditional owners, particularly the mob from Ngurai, has been quite a positive thing. And I think, a lot of the time we hear evidence before the Commission, particularly around sacred objects on farms and stuff like that, particularly farmers are unwilling to come forward because they're worried about different things happening and so forth. But your experience seems to be quite different around a positive experience with traditional owners.
It certainly is. And when we've had, occasional field days in the past, part of land care or farming projects, Auntie Marjorie Thorpe came and did a welcome to the farmers there. That probably doesn't happen a lot, but it meant a lot to me. She did. We've had other days, and Uncle Lloyd's come, and we do have a collection of axes and stones that have been picked up over many years, and they're kept, and they're still in the homestead, and they're going to know they're there and are happy they're kept sort of on country for now, but very much led on that too.
I suppose the sentiment I'm trying to see here is there's nothing to worry about.
No, and that's probably partly why one of my hopes from today is that other landholders see that and let go that angst of worrying that land will be resumed or impacts on what they're wanting to do. I mean, it's a shared journey, and I hope others will see that.
So Elizabeth's words are, it's a shared journey, and I hope that others will share that. That strikes at the very heart of what truth-telling means. What gives me hope is that Elizabeth isn't alone. We're seeing more and more non-Aboriginal people stepping forward, descendants of colonial figures, beneficiaries of stolen land, all choosing to face the truth of their families' histories, and all choosing to be a part of our healing. Because truth-telling is never just about First Peoples. It was never just about our pain, our stories, or our healing. Truth-telling is about all of us, about our understanding of our shared past, about facing difficult truths together, about celebrating the fact we live alongside the oldest living cultures in the world, about choosing what kind of future we want to create. Yep, there will be setbacks, and we've seen it in Queensland, and we will see it again. But let me tell you something about our people. We know about endurance. This isn't a sprint, it's not even a marathon, it's an ultra-marathon, and we're running with it for generations. So we keep going, and we keep fighting for change. We keep telling our truths, and we keep working, just as our elders did before us. We keep being brave, and we keep being strong allies. Because every step forward matters, every truth acknowledged helps heal, and every ally who stands with us makes us stronger. Every story shared lights the way forward. Don't ever stop believing we can make things better, and we will make things better, and we need to do it together. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Sis Chad Lofthouse, proud Ngurai and Bingable fella. Just a quick question. Do you think, with what's happening up in Queensland there, are there any other states where you feel confident that they're going to follow suit with the great work that you've led down there?
Yeah, I think we know people are watching, and we worked with Queensland about what was wrong, what we could have done better, what works well. So we assisted them in getting up and running really quickly. Can I just say that I was up there last week, and Mob are figuring out how to do it without government, which is what Mob does. He's going to follow, and I was speaking with John before, and he said, look, there's no plan. And we didn't have a plan until that treaty commissioner went out and spoke to community. So ours ended up being truth and justice, and Queensland ended up being truth and healing, because you've got to hear from Mob. So I do encourage people to engage in the process about what you want it to look like, what you want the future to look like, and how you want it ran. But I think, here in New South Wales, it looks promising. I think Queensland will continue without government, and you just don't know, because it revolves around elections and who gets in, doesn't it? So let's I can't say anything more than let's just keep fighting the good fight that we all do, because, I mean, for Mob, even in this room, every bit that you do daily adds to one step closer to what we want as First Peoples.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hunter, this is just a media question, but you, at Yoorrook, you've said that there were 16 apologies.
Yeah.
And
Where are you? Sorry, I can't.
Oh, over in the other, totally looking the total wrong way.
Oh, over there. Okay.
There.
Oh,
So-
it's Declan. Is it Declan?
Yes.
Oh, hello, Declan.
Hello. Just trip up from Melbourne together, so it's fine. Yes, you said there were 16 apologies, but you did mention it has the power of a royal commission. Yoorrook, is there a call to perhaps bring ministers back, because we've seen that a lot of the things haven't been enacted, or they haven't been in Victoria specifically, or they haven't been enacted, I suppose, or they've even gone backwards in some aspects, to hold maybe more ministers to account when it comes to these things, because it is real life that people are suffering and experiencing.
Yeah, thanks, Declan. There have been promises made within the Commission, things would happen or things would move forward. We're actually going to have accountability hearings early next year. We'll bring ministers back to answer as to why things haven't moved forward. But yeah, we'll definitely be having those.
Hi, Sue. There we go. Is it on now?
Yep.
That was excellent. Thank you so much for that keynote. And my question kind of follows on. I'm wondering, when was it that the minister apologised, and what has happened since then? Like, you know, where is the action from her commitment and her apology?
Yeah, I think Dan Andrews, and it was all over the media, promised to overhaul the child protection system, and then he went and resigned, so that didn't get done. There's sort of like little things getting done that... Look, they're little things, but they all add up to bigger things, I think. So there's some acts being put in place, and they're looking at, you know, permanent care, things like that. I don't see a big overhaul. I think people are waiting for treaty and what that looks like, which I think sometimes is a bit of a cop-out, particularly with child protection and criminal justice. The harms are happening now. And so with our recommendations, we did, you know, 2 overarching ones that particularly went to... treaty, but then the smaller ones that assist. You know, there's easy wins for the government, which we keep telling them that if they implemented these, and one they just picked up recently over a year is phone calls from prisons. You know, it was costing, I think there was an article done where it cost more to ring from the Pope from a mobile phone in Australia than it did to make a phone call out of prison. And we know that keeps mums and bubs and families connected, being able to talk to them on a daily basis. Now, that's a small win, but that's a massive win for the women I spoke to. And so that just adds on to other things. I think taking the age of criminal responsibility to 10 and not 12 and taking that backwards, we're disappointed, but we need to take the wins as we can get them. As I said, this is a long fight that our people, generations before us, and I think John pointed out earlier, we aren't saying anything new. We've all said this before, and those before us have said this. We've just got to pick up where they left off and keep fighting the good fight. Thank you.